Hi, my name is Heather Stratford, and I am the CEO and founder of Drip7, which is a microlearning platform for cyber education. We're going to talk a lot about the industry, what's happening, the different trends, and have a great conversation about what is to come in this industry. So the future of cyber education, how do we actually create a cybersecurity culture? That is the number one question that I get asked when I talk to CISOs, CTOs. They say what they're currently doing doesn't work and they need something better. How do they create an actual culture of cybersecurity? So let's look at the current state of affairs. Right now, we still have massive increases in attacks. Since the beginning of COVID-19, there's been a huge increase in malware and ransomware. I specifically work a lot in the hospital and medical industry, and in that industry, we have an increase of about 1,000% in 1 year in ransomware. So it's off the charts. You probably have experienced increased attacks in your own industry, but just know it's not going away. So we really have what's called the perfect storm, right? We sent people home with COVID where they are remoting in from all kinds of different places. We also, at the same time, over the last 5 to 10 years, have had a huge shift to the cloud environment. And most companies are not putting big data rooms and stacks in the basement. They are shifting to Azure or they're shifting to AWS and they're putting things in the cloud. That has its own cybersecurity risks and education curve that needs to happen. We also have a shift in the global workforce. There's currently more millennials in the global workforce than there are baby boomers. And that shift happened in 2019, right before COVID-19 hit. So you wrap all three of these together and you're looking at the perfect storm. So it's really a people problem, right? We know this because we know that 90% of breaches can be traced back to human error. 90%. Now, this could be misconfiguring a firewall, not setting up dual-factor authentication right. There are other more technology issues on that front, but it really, the majority comes through human error. And so we can put all the firewalls in place we want, but we are not going to effectively change when people are the ones who are letting, let's call criminals in. The FBI has reported that since the beginning of COVID, so the beginning of 2020, that we have a 400% increase in cybercrime reporting. What is unbelievable to me is that there are still companies that don't regularly train in cybersecurity. They, for some reason, think that they're immune, it's not important to them, or that they have other priorities than keeping their bank account, their sensitive information, and really the lifeblood of their company safe. Cybercrime is currently happening every 30 seconds. Now, 65% of hackers use email as a primary source of infection. When I looked at this, I said, oh, it's got to be higher than that, right? Well, we do know it's higher than that. This is specifically with spear phishing. So phishing in general, they can have blanket phishing emails, social engineering, but that social engineering then goes back and spear phishes key people within an organization. Those key people also tend to be an older generation. How did they get there? Through lots of years of hard work in that company. And so they are spear phished, whether it is the C-suite and the executives or the accounting department, they are being spear phished. By 2025, there will be 95 billion connected devices, billion with a B. This is a doubling just in the next couple of years. Currently, we are in the 35 to 40 billion range. Today, IoT devices are experiencing 5,200 attacks per month. We had a vice president many years ago called, his name was Dick Cheney, and he had a pacemaker that was an IoT device. And he was required to have that pacemaker removed before he could serve as vice president of the United States. So we've had this issue for a long time, but we have continued to say, no, my refrigerator needs to be connected, my car is connected, everything is connected. So for small businesses, and most organizations, there are still 3 out of 4 that do not have an incident response plan. They might do training. They might even have a cybersecurity policy for insurance. But if an incident happens, they don't have a plan in place. Now, most of those same companies, they definitely have a fire plan in place. You know which exits to go. You sometimes have fire drills, but we don't have a cyber incident response plan. It's critical because that first 24 hours is the time that you have to know what to do, who to call, and how to proceed. So if I could say anything, getting that in play is the number one thing. It's a problem that is getting worse, and we all know it. So probably everybody that's on this call is in IT, some of you specifically in cybersecurity. You know it's a problem, but it's a problem that you're like, yeah, but what do I do, right? You almost feel like your hands are tied, or you've tried it before, but it didn't quite work. My message is there are new ways of addressing this problem that are getting better results and having more engagement. So let's talk just a little bit about ransomware and what is ransomware, right? Since 2016, there's been over 4,000 ransomware attacks in the United States daily. Okay, that's the key word here. It's not 4,000 attacks per year, it's 4,000 attacks daily. And we're talking about eye doctors, changing oil places, insurance companies, hospitals. It really doesn't matter what kind of industry that you're in. It's all important, and it's all transferring money, and it's criminals getting to that. So what does it do? It holds the entire system hostage by encrypting that information. It doesn't remove it from the computer or the network. It encrypts it with 256-bit encryption, something that most people I talk to say, well, can't you just crack it? Can't you just fix it? No, you're not going to fix it because this is a secret code. I try to explain, it is something that we're not going to crack. We're not going to find the right key. The prevention is the number one thing for ransomware. So ransomware poses a significant threat. Private companies, government, everybody. And it's on the rise. They expect that it will double or triple next year in 2022. So don't think that we've seen the end of this surge of ransomware attacks. So let's look at some recent examples of companies that have been hit and what we can learn from them. All 3 of these companies have been hit in 2021. These are actually the 3 largest attacks within, let's say, the United States. The Colonial Pipeline got a lot of publicity and a lot of media attention. We do not know 100%, but from backtracking and doing forensics, they say that a single compromised password was probably the entry point. It was a password that had been previously used by an employee in other places. It had not been purged. It was part of what was there. What did they get? Well, the 4.4 million in ransom was paid in Bitcoin, and that 4.4 million is not a huge amount of money. What was huge was the fact that they shut down the oil supply to the East Coast of the United States. That is critical infrastructure, and the ripple effects and ramifications of ransomware attacks to critical infrastructure, you and I both know, is catastrophic. So we look at the Colonial Pipeline and we look at it in terms of, one, they didn't have a cybersecurity culture. And more specifically, passwords were at the root problem of what their employees did not understand. So what went wrong, right? The account was no longer in use at the time of the attack, but could still be used to access the Colonial network. What they also did not have in place is multi-factor authentication, because just because they had the key or the initial password, if they had had multi-factor authentication on, that would have taken care of that initial slip, right? Key and deadbolt, they had two forms. So that's what we learned from the Colonial Pipeline. So Acer was also a very large breach within 2021. Now, they are a Taiwanese computer giant, and as such, we do not know officially if the ransom was paid. They don't have to disclose that, but we do know that the ransom that was asked for was $50 million in the demand. We also know that REvil was the group that attacked them, and that it is the largest known ransom demand that we have on record. So the stakes are going up. So what did they really attack? They attacked through the Microsoft Exchange vulnerability, and Microsoft had sent out an alert saying that it was needed to be patched. So Acer's problem was more of a cultural problem, that they delayed in their patching of something that was critical throughout their organization. What went wrong? Acer needed multi-layer network infrastructure, security awareness training. Their employees needed to understand more about the vulnerabilities and monitoring data transfers. I like this quote from the CISO at Bluefin. He said, "It's very important to employ multiple layers of security and monitoring controls in your environment to help prevent this type of exposure. It's not one thing, it's a culture. It's a culture that you have to create based on cybersecurity, that everybody kind of knows this is front and center, and it's important to get it right." The third example in this case is CNA Financial. So CNA Financial is actually an insurance company out of Chicago, and they're a large company, been around a long time, since the 1800s. But the irony to me is they are actually a cyber insurer. So they have cyber insurance that they provide to other companies, and they were hit with a $40 million ransom that, to our knowledge, was paid to the hackers. The amount of data that was compromised was about 75,000 individuals with sensitive data and information. How did they get in? A fake and malicious browser update, which is a complicated attack. Once again, it's a cyber culture that's going to better find and shut down this type of attack, because people need to be educated. They need to understand when they download things what that could mean. So it's a cyber education issue. Companies can't just rely on cybersecurity products. You can't just say, oh, the IT team has it, right? Like, they've got something on my computer, it's all safe. Organizations have to understand they're being attacked. So adopting that cybersecurity culture, it does not happen generally from the bottom up. It happens from the top down. Senior leadership, IT, all of management makes it a priority, and everybody down the line understands this is the new priority. So what do you don't do? I love this image because I get this all the time. People say, but it's not going to happen to me. It's not going to affect us. They put their head in the sand and they think that the problem will go away if they don't address it or think about it. The problem does not go away. It actually gets worse because you have compounding factors, right? The technology side, the people side, industry compliance requirements, right? It will shut down a business. So let's break that cycle. I often say to people, what is the definition of insanity? Insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. So what do we have to do? We have to do things differently if we expect a different result. That is especially important in cybersecurity and in education. The things we've done in the past didn't work very well because it was all based on one time a year. Hey, I'm going to do a training. Everybody's going to click through it and I've completed, I've checkboxed. If we do that, we'll never move to the next level. So training your workforce is all about the prevention side of cybersecurity. You're preventing things before it happens. That's why we have fire drills, because we want to make sure people know how to get out of the building if the fire starts in the building, right? If it's on fire, we want them to know. In a panic situation, it is not the time for them to say, hey, where's my exit, right? They have to know ahead of time what to do and how to do it. So you train your employees for the results that you want. So treating cybersecurity training as just a box to check, it's a costly mistake. It is what a lot of companies do because they say, this is the bare minimum requirement of what I'm required to do. Maybe they have a HIPAA requirement, or maybe they process credit cards and you have to have a PCI designation and you have to do training every year to keep your PCI certification. Cybersecurity training as an industry has systemically measured the wrong results for decades. This is my idea of, hey, if we do the same thing over and over again, how are we going to get any better at it? What we have measured is, have we checkboxed and did Bill, Sue, and Mary, did they all do their training? So typical LMS systems or learning management systems, they look at something and say, did they finish it? Did they not? Sometimes they have an assessment of 10 questions and they say, did they get an 80% or not? Is it complete or is it not complete? That is not the measurement that helps us move forward. We have known this information from the Ebbinghaus studies that happened over 100 years ago. And the idea has been built upon ever since, that humans actually forget. And how do we forget? We forget because we put a lot of information in one side, right? And then we get more information, so we forget the non-essential information. When you look at this, if you have a 60-minute or 1 hour training for your employees, within 60 minutes of that training, they have lost over 50% of the information that was given to them. If you go out 30 days or a full month, they will be down in the 20% range of what they can remember, right? Now, how do we impact this and make it different? through consistent repetition and reinforcement of that material. So if you say, I've done a training, yay, we got one done for the year, it was done in January, and you go and in July, you ask somebody, what did we train you on? If they can remember more than 10 or 15%, you're doing well, because they don't put it into play, they don't remember it. So we forget. The antidote to this is reinforcement. So you learn less the longer the training goes. This is probably one of my favorite slides in this entire deck because it's so impactful when we realize that under 6 minutes is where learning maintains and we have our attention levels set. We are much more of a fast-paced work environment. We're on a website 20 seconds, we check our social media, we text, we talk to people, we're in snippets, sound bites. We can focus in shorter and shorter amounts of time. Under 6 minutes is where we can hold our attention span. And this is people who are trying to, right? We're not talking about young children. We're talking about working adults can hold their attention for 5 to 6 minutes. When you get to 69 minutes, learners become less engaged and less highly motivated to complete the training. They start to check out. They do not, they're there. They're like, yep. And they're thinking about, oh, what am I putting on for dinner? Or, oh, I've got to get the car fixed. Or they're thinking about something else because they're not engaged in it and they're not listening. When you get to 9+ minutes, just 10 minutes of time, right? After that point, learners aren't engaged. So if I take that cue, most of you that are on this presentation, you're checked out. You haven't even finished. You're thinking about something else because it's too long. It's an hour's worth of content. So I'm going to shake you and I'm going to make you say, focus on this. Stay with me. I've got a couple more things and then I will let you get to whatever you're thinking about. But did you find yourself drifting? Did you find yourself not thinking about it? Well, that's what happens. So for us to combat this, we have to do things in shorter and shorter increments, which means we need to do micro-learning. Training once a year is a relic of the past, okay? If you're doing something over and over again and expecting different results, that's the definition of insanity, right? So training once a year is not going to do it anymore. It's just not how we learn. The answer to the problem is consistency. I like this graphic because it really visualizes what we're talking about. We're talking about not a large amount of information at once. We can't absorb it. We need to have small bits of information if we want people to actually start to use that behavior. If we want them to know, hey, every time you do this on the computer, we'd like you to check this. It's small reminders and small consistency that will make the change in behavior. Now, the generational shift in our workforce has just amplified this. We have a mix of people. We have an older generation. We have the middle. I'm considered a Gen Xer, right? Then we've got millennials. We've got Gen Z. We've got a lot of different people in the work environment. But older employees, people who are considered baby boomers, are used to deep learning experiences, grounded in fundamentals. That's how they were raised. That's how they process information. When you move to younger groups, like the millennial group and Gen Z, they find microlearning works. They can focus and shift much quicker, and they want to learn that way. They can't sit and listen to a 4-hour training and be expected to retain that information. So the millennial group will represent 75% of the global workforce by 2025. That is just 4 years away. A new generation of workers needs to find a new solution. And there's 2 key factors to the new solution. 1 is gamification, and 2 is microlearning. These 2 components are what is changing how we approach cybersecurity education. And they need to be put hand in hand to be effective. So let's go into them a little bit deeper. Microlearning, what is it? We talked about our attention span being much more consistent and focused between 5 and 6 minutes or under, right? So microlearning is saying, we're going to give you a small amount of information, bite-sized, small units of learning that we can then build upon. We can reinforce it, we can repeat it, maybe not in the same exact word, same exact way, but repeat the concepts. We accomplish things by guiding learners to a specific goal. So they might be earning something at the end that they have to go through several bite-sized learning lessons to get to. And we reinforce it by using the keys to true learning because they get consistency. At the end, they will be able to recall the information because of the repetition and consistency of the message. So what advantages does microlearning bring to a business, right? Let's take your organization. I don't know how big it is. Is it small? Is it large? What does your workforce look like? But I'm going to bet that you have a lot of diverse workers. You have some currently working from home. You have some maybe out in the field, right? This type of microlearning can be cheaper and faster to produce, right? It's not you don't have to bring everybody into a room or a conference room and have them all spend an hour or 2 of their time, right? Cheaper and faster. You can deliver in short bursts that fits in a younger employee's tasks, right? So you're fitting in between things. They might be waiting for something to process on a computer or waiting for somebody to show up in a delivery van, but they can do things on their own time or while they're clocked in, but still in small bits of time. Connecting learning to what you already know and doesn't overload your memory. So it's not deep learning, but over time, you start to connect all the dots. Knowledge can be immediately put into action. So one of the things about microlearning is giving them tools. Hey, here is a keystroke that will save you time. Here's a keystroke. Here's the keystroke that saves you time doing this. Over time, they'll start to say, oh, that's a really great immediate action to save me time. Lessons can be accessed as needed to ensure long-term retention. And they can go back to the microlearning lesson when they say, hey, what was that keystroke? I remember they had it here. What was that? And they can immediately find that information. So companies that are currently using microlearning, you recognize some of these names, right? Berkshire Hathaway, Walmart, Google, right? These are big companies that are brand names that we know about. They are using microlearning to help their employees better understand and move forward with their learning and education. So let's go back to this. There are 2 specific sides that we need to look at. One of them is the microlearning side, small bits of information. The other side is gamification. How do they work together? Let's talk about it. So gamification, in its simplest form, you need to make it fun. You need to make it low stress and internally motivating exercises. Now, some people are going to say to me, okay, how do you make cybersecurity fun, right? Well, that is what the industry is headed towards. And that's what my company has been focused on, is how to gamify cybersecurity. but there are other players in the market who are attacking the same problem with gamification. So gamified learning consciously targets your subconscious. It gives you some endorphins. It's like, oh, I'm doing something. Oh, I got a reward, right? We have all kinds of apps on our phone. You can probably name your top 3 or 4 that you have that you're like, oh, I love to play this, or I like to do this. It's a fun, low stress way for you to engage. So gamification helps with motivation. You want to jump on. You want to increase your point count. It was amazing to me that as we rolled out our platform to large organizations, I consistently would run a beta group first, and oftentimes with an IT set. And the IT would text me and they'd say, hey, can you give me more questions? I need to beat so-and-so on the leaderboard, which was really interesting because they were motivated to engage with the learning because they wanted to be part of it, right? It was luring them in. They wanted their point counts to go up. They wanted to receive badges or points within the system. Now, when you look at HR information about workers and their motivation and productivity, gamification makes it go through the roof. It is the number one thing right now that people are saying, hey, when I receive gamified training, I feel more productive, I feel more motivated, I feel like I want to be here. One of the key components of companies right now is retention, right? How do you retain a workforce that has 75% millennials who are like, well, if I don't like it, I'm going to leave? In the old days, you just say, well, if you don't like it, just stick to it. You know, it'll get better in a little while, or it'll get better, right? But now we have millennials who say, well, if I don't like it, I'm out. So how do you retain those workers? You retain them by starting to speak their language and by helping bring in more things like gamification and microlearning so that you can have a more productive work environment. What companies are using gamification? You recognize these, right? Microsoft, Domino's, Deloitte, Blue Wolf, all of these use gamification in working with their employees. So nurture true skill development. This is the key component of how you're going to create cybersecurity culture change. You have to have some kind of repetition of the concepts to build habits and skills that can be practiced. You engage people by giving them access to the content and incentivizing them to learn, bridging the gap between what they currently know and what you want them to know, and then bridging the gap between what they know and then putting it into place and giving them the tools to do that. You might say, I want you to identify a phishing email. Okay, that's great. Then you want to say, I want you to identify it, and then I want you to be able to know how to report it back to an IT department. That's a second step. That's engagement with the learning process. Leads to the goal of true knowledge. They can find it, they can identify it, they can learn from it, they can not click on it, they can report it, right? These are all positive behaviors you're trying to see. Motivation, creating an ecosystem of learning that employees don't dread. I've had people literally tell me, I've done cybersecurity training, I wanted to poke my eyes out, right? I've heard people say, I went and got coffee, I let it run. I was so annoyed when I had to come back and actually click through something, right? It's called, in the industry, it's called forced navigation, meaning you have to have somebody there clicking around so that they can't just let something run. We don't want to force people who think that it's it's worse than poking their eyes out. I mean, what's the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing. So let's give them a better solution, something that's engaging, something that is short and memorable, and gives them the ability to learn the material and engage with it. So solve the people problem. Gamification and microlearning are the two key trends and factors that are helping solve the people problem for cybersecurity education. Your people are your most valuable resource in any organization, large or small. So give them the tools to succeed. Thank you so much for attending. Please connect with me on LinkedIn, Instagram, on Twitter. I'd love to talk to people about microlearning and what they learned in here, and if they had their own experience with putting out a program that had gamification and microlearning within the platform or within the program that they're running. Love to talk to people about this because we have to do something different, and I hope you've learned something today. Thank you for your time.